And welcome back. As we go ahead and get ready to wrap our discussion up on classes, we first need to add one more thing to our toolbox, which is this introduction to something known as JavaDoc. So before we actually look at what JavaDoc is, we first need to have an understanding about something else, which is that the principles of encapsulation using information hiding, so for example, our private and public modifiers, say that you should technically separate the interface of a class, so the instruction of how to use that class, from the implementation, or the detailed code that tells the computer how the class actually does its work. Now, in some programming languages, such as C++, you normally define a class into two files. You have one file that contains something kind of like an interface or an API that will tell the programmer all they need to know how to use that class. And then the other file contains the implementation details that are needed for the class code to actually run. This system is an obvious way to separate the interface from the implementation, but it is not how Java actually handles it. Instead, we have something called JavaDoc. Java does not divide a class definition into two files. So if you notice, when we create a class file, there's one file for it. Because what Java does, it actually takes the interface and the implementation of a class and mixes it together into a single file. If this, though, were the only thing it did, well, Java would not do a very good job of encapsulation using information hiding. However, the way that it handles this is separating the interface from the actual class implementation. Java does this by coming with a program called JavaDoc that automatically extracts the interface from a class definition. If your class definition is correctly commented, a programmer using your class need only look at this API or documentation produced by the JavaDoc. The JavaDoc produced documentation is pretty much going to be identical in format to the documentation that's if you look at the standard Java library classes, which is pretty helpful because then if you're used to looking at that style of like, how does Java write this, it's automatically going to be written the same way. Now, the result of running JavaDoc on a class is an HTML file with an API documentation for the class that you created. Now, the documentation, because it is in HTML, can be easily viewed in something like a web browser. And you don't have to know any HTML to view that documentation or even just to run JavaDoc. You don't have to worry about knowing one more thing on top of everything else. JavaDoc can be used to obtain documentation for a single class, though its primary intention is to obtain documentation for an entire package. All right, because a lot of times we're using these for things like APIs and stuff like that, so it's a library of classes that we're going to use. Now, we will discuss how you should comment your classes so you can run to get the most out of JavaDoc for describing how you can run the JavaDoc program. First thing you have to understand is commenting your classes for JavaDoc. So if we want to get a more useful JavaDoc document, you must write your comments in a particular way. The JavaDoc program extracts the heading of your class or classes, as well as headings for all public methods, public instance variables, public static variables, and also certain comments. No method bodies and no private items are extracted when JavaDoc is run from its normal default mode. I mean, that would kind of defeat the purpose of having a private modifier if we could extract that information. For JavaDoc to run in this kind of default mode of extracting a comment, though, the comment has to satisfy two conditions. One, the comment must immediately precede a public class definition, a public method definition, or some other public item. And the comment that you're doing must be a block comment, that is, with the / star style of comments, and the opening star has to have an extra asterisk. All right, because if you don't have that, then it's not going to recognize it as a comment for JavaDoc, and we'll look at that here in a minute. So unless you explicitly set an extra option to JavaDoc, single line comments are not extracted. All right, and any comments preceding any private items are also not extracted. All right, a lot of times those single line comments are things that we put in there as notes to ourselves, and so this is a great way to help still keep that separated out so we don't worry about it ending up in our documentation. Now, the comment that precedes a public method definition can include any general information we like. However, there is also special syntax for inserting descriptions of parameters, any values returned, and any exceptions that might be thrown. Now, we haven't talked about exceptions or throws, as that's a concept I handle in our Programming 2 material. So how do we do that? Well, the way we're going to handle all these special syntax is with the @ tag. So special information about parameters and so forth are preceded by the @ symbol and are called tags. The following is an example method common for use with JavaDoc. So you notice we have the /**, Test for equality of two objects of type person to be equal to two objects must have the same name, same birth date, and same death date. At param other person, the person being compared to the calling object. At return, returns true if the calling object equals other person. Public boolean equals person other person. Now you'll note that the at tags all come after any general comments, and that each at tag is on a line by itself. And just to kind of give you an idea of some of the at tags that you can use at param, which is to identify parameters. So what is that parameter? You give it a name, description. You have return description, which is a description of the value return. At throws, exception type explanation. At deprecated, at C, at author, at version. There are more than this, but this just gets you kind of an idea of some of those tags that we can use. And these are ones that you might see pretty often. Now, the at tags should appear in the order above that we just saw. So if you're using that set of tags, which again are the most common ones that you're probably going to run into, the first at param, then at return, then at throws, and so forth should be the order in which they appear in your documentation. Now, for example, if you have, let's say, multiple parameters, they should each have their own at param line and appear on separate lines. So let's say we had a function that's going to pull in 3 parameters. That means I need to have 3 at params and having their own description that matches with them. The parameters and their at param descriptions should be listed in their left to right order also in your parameter list. So if I have, let's say, string value 1, string value 2, string value 3 as parameters, then I have to make sure my at params match that same exact order. Now, if you have, for another thing, like multiple authors, all right, each of those should have their own at author tag and should appear on their own line because, again, you want to separate those out. The author and version information, though, are not extracted unless suitable option flags have been set, such as described in our upcoming lesson here. Well, the one thing to also keep in mind is the deprecated tag, and this is one that you might see. If app deprecated is included in a method comment, then the documentation notes that the method is deprecated. And a deprecated method by definition is one that's being phased out. Now, this is something that Java's looking at and saying, hey, we don't want you to use this approach anymore. It's typically done for backwards compatibility and will still work. However, you should not use this style in new code. So if you come across any at deprecated, then you need to make sure that you have a new approach being implemented if you're creating a brand new program. Now, if you have an at tag included for, let's say, an item, then Java is going to extract the explanation for whatever that item is, included in the documentation. You should always include a complete set of at tags in the comment for each of your methods. The comments that are not part of the at tag appear as a general comment for that method, along with the method heading. Now, just as a note, you can also insert HTML commands into your comments, so you gain even more control over your JavaDoc, but it's not necessary. It may even actually be kind of undesirable depending on what you're going for, because HTML comments can really start getting pretty cluttering and make it very hard to read when you actually go and look at the source code. Now let's actually talk about running that JavaDoc so we can actually see this in some examples. So if I want to create a JavaDoc in Eclipse, you can use by going to Project and then Generate JavaDoc. If you didn't have an IDE to do this, then you'd have to use the command line to enter JavaDoc-D documentation package name. Now, when you're running the JavaDoc, you're typically going to get a lot more directories and many more HTML files than you might otherwise expect. And we'll see this here when we run this in a second. Now, kind of as a last note is that you don't need to run JavaDoc on an entire package. Remember, we can focus that down just to a single class as well. We don't have to JavaDoc everything. And so here I am in Eclipse with a class. And now you notice right now my class that I have here, for example, does not have any comments set up for it. And so I'm going to go ahead and just add in, let's say, a quick comment here, just so we can have this here. So / and then we do **, hit enter. And so now we can see we have a comment here. So I'm just going to add in here constructor. Well, this is technically our no arg constructor. No arg constructor. All right. I'm just going to leave that there. And let's just go ahead and go to do one of our accessor methods here. So /*, enter. And you notice one thing that happened when I did this one is that we automatically had this at return populated in here. what is that saying? Well, it's saying because we have this return statement here, we're expecting some kind of value to be returned back. So I'm just going to add in a description here that says gets the PC name and returns it to the user. All right, and we can add more description here with the @return. For example, we can say return, and we're going to say computer name. All right, and of course we can make this more descriptive, but I think just for demonstration purposes this will be good. Now I could go through each of these other ones here, but I think this would be good just to get some quick idea of how this works. So let's go ahead and create that Java documentation. Now the way we want to do this is we go to project, and we're going to hit generate JavaDoc. Now, when we do this, we, of course, get a whole bunch of different things that are going to pop up here. You can see all these different classes. I'm just only going to leave this one checked here, which is what I'm in. I'm in my 615 example. So I'm going to open it up and just make sure that what I want is only in that package. And so you can see it's not a solid check mark because that gives you the option to kind of filter down. And so we only want to pull from here. And I can, of course, click back on that package. And you can see we have two classes in here. There's beatboop.java and computer Java. I don't want beatboop to be checked because that is my driver class, and that's not necessarily a class I'm going to want to build into a set of libraries. So I'm just going to leave that one unchecked, and we can choose where we want this to be generated. By default, this is going to try to put it into that same path as where your class folder is. And that's perfectly fine for our testing purposes. And you might even say, yeah, that's perfectly fine because by default, it's going to create this /doc folder. And so if you go and look in your clips file, you might have like your bin file and all those other things. The doc folder is a perfectly acceptable location. So I'm just going to leave that as is. And then you can, of course, control visibility here. It says create JavaDoc with members with visibility, private package, protected public. By default, this is the default setting. This is that public that we were talking about. If we go down to private, that's going to, of course, open up to a lot more modifiers that we may not want. So I'm going to leave this on public level. And if I hit next here, you of course can get a lot more deeper into some of this. And so you can document any tags that aren't in there. And again, you can go through all this, but the basic thing. So for our basic demonstration, we're just going to do this. Let's hit finish. It says you chose to update the location, blah, blah, blah. Do we want to do this? Let's just go ahead and hit yes to all. And then it's going to run. All right, it says 6 warnings, but it looks like it's terminated. So let's go ahead and check out that folder. And here's that folder right here. So here's my doc folder. So this is, of course, the project file that belongs to this folder here with Eclipse. Open up doc, and you can see all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. In fact, if I just for comparison, if I go look, let's say it's 613, you see we do not have a doc folder. All right, that means this folder was not created until I ran that JavaDoc. And so when we ran it, created this doc folder. And in here you can see we have a bunch of different files in here. You might be wondering, how do I navigate all this? How do I handle this? Well, right here is an index file here. So I'm going to go on to open up this index file. And once I've done that, you can see I have a whole bunch of information here before me. And this can get to be pretty complex if you're not used to navigating that. It's, in fact, we'll take another lesson to kind of deep dive into this a little bit more. But just to create your JavaDoc, let's just go ahead and see, for example, some of those different things here. We can see we have different things. So, for example, right here it says constructor details, public computer. And underneath you can see there's this text that says no R constructor. If remember, that is something that we wrote in here. And in fact, if I go down here to get PC name, you'll see it says gets the PC name and returns it to the user. And what does it returns? It returns the computer name. So again, these are things that we have control over, or as the programmer, but as someone who might be coming to use this class, and I want to know, okay, what does the get PC name do? Oh, well, it gets the PC name and returns it to the user. So it's a real helpful way for someone who might be using your program that you've written to go ahead and figure out what exactly that program does.